Hello, and welcome to the How I Tested That podcast. I'm your host, David J. Bland. I'm an author and advisor, and I'm fascinated with testing early-stage ideas. I've helped companies all around the world, and in this podcast, I connect with entrepreneurs and innovators who had the courage to test their ideas with real people in the market, with sometimes surprising results. Please join us as we explore the ups and downs of experimentation together. Today's guests are Brandy and Craig Elias. Brandy supports high-growth, high-potential companies to build a better world. She's passionate about community building, connecting, and focusing on empowering entrepreneurs and organizations to tackle the world's most challenging issues. Craig is an entrepreneur in residence, sales expert, and startup mentor. He's a passionate startup advisor and the creator of the Trigger Event Selling System. He's a gifted pitch coach with an incredible track record. Welcome to the podcast, Brandy and Craig.
Thanks for having us.
So, if I remember correctly, we first met sometime during the blur that was the pandemic. So, it was 2020. All my work from in-person had to be remote. And I was still helping out Draper University. And we were connected because we were all these Canadian startups coming through Draper. And we started collaborating. And I realized, oh, wow, there's this amazing stuff going up in Canada that I'm not even aware of. And I believe that's how we start collaborating. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's how we got started.
Yeah, I think it was the first time we sent some students to the virtual Draper boot camp. And I went through myself because I wanted to see what students were going through. And I'm like, hey, David, this risk assumption thing. I'm like, oh my God, I've struggled with this for so long. Can we do something? And that's how we got started. I think we did our first group, Randy, with 25 students or something. Do you remember?
Yeah, I think that's about it.
Yeah, so we started collaborating, and then fast forward to recently, I was up in Calgary for Inventures, which was an amazing conference, by the way. Thank you for inviting me up to speak to that. And I was thinking, I have to get you on the podcast because I want to hear about, one, how you live and breathe this testing approach and how you're applying it, but you're applying it to help people learn how to do testing, which I think is fascinating. So maybe give me some background a bit on you all and how you're kind of thinking through this and some of the challenges you've had along the way.
Yeah, so maybe I'll kick it off because I was kind of the newbie to the group. So I started my career in helping student entrepreneurs after I graduated with a degree in English teaching. And I had to figure out how to teach people entrepreneurship. And my whole focus was I never wanted to be an entrepreneur because my mom was one and I saw what happened. And I was like, no way would anyone pay me enough money to do this. So I became fascinated with de-risking so that I could help new entrepreneurs avoid some of the mistakes that I saw my mom make over the years. And Craig was the entrepreneur in residence at Bow Valley College. Sent an email out to anyone with entrepreneurship in their title at universities across the province in Alberta and said, I'll come do free workshops for you. And I was like, this is the ticket. So I invited him to come. Then he introduced me to the lean canvas approach that Ash has designed. I bought his book. I read it and I built a really rough course and started taking in some experiment approaches that you use, David, around iterating. Brought in my first folks for a pilot, got feedback from them, shared it to folks like Craig to get some pieces around how to make it better, and then built an incubator program out of it that's still running today.
And then what happened for me was once that began to happen, we actually brought up Ash to Calgary for a day, and then Brandy and I were talking about the fact that bringing someone up once is okay, but we need to skill up all these mentors so more people can be helped. And it's not just me and Brandy doing all this work. So I was visiting Brandy's school one day and I go by this boardroom that has glass doors. And what do I see on the big screen? I see Ash. And I start talking to Brandy and I'm like, we need to do something around mentoring. And Brandy's a way better writer than I am. So she wrote a grant for, I think, something like $30,000. The next thing we know, we skilled up a lot of the mentors inside the province. And once we got people thinking differently about experimenting, it's amazing how things took off. And then something happened within Alberta Innovates, did it not, Brandy, after that?
Yeah, so our original ask was to upskill people in post-secondaries. So there's a lot of people like me getting hired that didn't know how to coach entrepreneurs, and they were coming to Craig and I all the time asking for help. And we were like, oh, we need to do something about this. So we proposed to bring Ash up to teach people about the lean startup methodology and teaching the lean canvas. And Alberta Innovates, who funded us with the grant, invited some folks. So because it was COVID, we were going to bring him up in person. And then all of a sudden his cost structure changed because we couldn't do that anymore. So we went from having, I think, 15 seats to like 40 seats, something in there. And we had quite a few folks from Alberta Innovates and other mentors in the ecosystem join. And they liked it so much that they actually built a fund where they had startups work through ASH's 90-day startup process to learn about how to do the lean startup methodology. And we still use it today in a lot of our evaluation of our grants to help people understand how to iterate and test using a lot of experimentation methods.
Wow. So it feels as if there was some organic kind of reach here, or word of mouth, potentially. You're seeing success. What are some of the big challenges you had from getting people to just, hey, I want to build the whole thing and launch it, to, oh, I need to test my way through this and maybe talk to customers? Like, what are some of the challenges you faced there, and how did you overcome them?
So I think for me, the way that, especially with students, the way we overcame it was with money. We bribed them. So what we did was we said, okay, if you want to be in this pitch competition, because the first time we ran this pitch competition, we ran it with no requirements, and we gave away like $25,000 in cash. And students took that money, went away and spent it on their ideas, and a year later had nothing to show for it. So now we're like, oh, we need to fix this. So what we then did is said, okay, we're going to create these lean startup challenges. And we had a little help from a friend in Detroit, used to be in New York, Adam Burke, who I think you know. So we created these challenges where if you wanted to be in the pitch competition, you had to do two things. One, you had to go away and interview total strangers, 25 of them. And if you did that, we then gave you up to $750 to then go run Facebook ads. So it was around, how do we understand who's our customer? And then once we got the problem and the customer, what are these risk assumptions, and how do we go test these assumptions? And this was before I think I met you, David, and we were just lucky because the first thing was customer interviews, and the second thing was online ads. And when I go to my two favorite pages in the book, $98.99, like every single one of those things says, start with a customer interview and then go do online ads. So I think we just got lucky. Now we know what we're doing, right, Brandy?
Totally. And it's getting them to do the interviews. So still to this day, people will do surveys over interviews. And we continue to face that challenge in helping people get comfortable and going out to talk to strangers and find out what is actually going on in the market.
Yeah. And I think part of the way we overcame that challenge, though, David, was we had this boot camp, and we then challenged. One time we challenged students and said, hey, here's your challenge. You've got to do these 25 interviews. Do you want to try and get them done over a few weeks, or do you want to just try and get them all done in one day? And we gave them this challenge and said, go do these interviews in one day. And it's amazing how many students came back with a team of people and had done 25, 30 interviews with total strangers. So it's amazing when you ask for something, it's amazing how you get it.
And there's a tech that we use too at the boot camp, right, Craig? VentureQuest, the VR one. What's it called?
So, Venture Blocks.
Venture Blocks.
So, are you familiar with Venture Blocks, David?
I'm not.
So, Venture Blocks was created by Heidi Neck, who is the entrepreneurship professor at Babson College. And it's a simulation that teaches people how to do these interviews so they can practice before they go out into the real world. Right? We also bribe them with cash there because we say, hey, the top 3 people with the highest score, guess what you get? You get cash. And so we find that when there's an unmovable date, like you have to get done by now or you don't get there, and if there's cash involved, students are encouraged to do something now instead of wait till later.
Yeah, it's interesting how the money's always gone, right? So it's like, what do you have to show for the money? And I think it's really smart because customer interviews usually don't cost a lot unless you're trying to do something B2B where it can get expensive to find somebody to talk to potentially. But customer interviews are pretty quick. There's other light evidence, same with surveys. What beyond interviews and surveys and ads do you see, or do you help people test their way through their early stage ideas? Like what beyond those 3 do you see that are really impactful?
So the biggest one that I tend to start with is a day in the life. So I come from a design thinking background, and a lot of times early stage entrepreneurs or students go, well, I don't even know what problem I'm solving. I'm just fascinated in food security or the environment. So to help them get prepared for interviews, I take them through the day in the life exercise, which I think you have in your book for highly regulated spaces. Just to have a conversation to find out, like, what's a year in the life of a farmer look like? What's a semester look like for a student? What's the lived experience of someone to help identify what those problems are without a leading question, which when we're doing interviews is a tough skill to learn of how to ask the right questions without going future tense or leading them down a path and assuming that the problem that you've identified is something worth talking about. So I find that to be one of the most effective tools that we've used.
For me, my other favorite one is landing pages. So as we're going through this process, I actually hired a developer to build me a template for a landing page that's modeled after the stuff that you taught me, David. And then what we do is every time a student says, hey, I want to use this, we can replicate that landing page. They can then modify it specifically by just changing a few words or a few pictures. And then we use Facebook ads to drive people to the landing page so they can then start doing some work around customer discovery. So I'm a fan of those landing pages. And I like the landing pages for two reasons. One, it's somewhere students can direct people, but it gets students to just think about the shortest way to describe, the pains, gains, and jobs to be done. And it forces them to be super vigilant on how little can they say to create interest in what it is that they're doing.
So day in the life, which I'm a fan of. I think I first stumbled upon that with the Value Prop Design book from Alex Osterwalder, and then Intuit. I actually have some folks from Intuit on a future podcast I'm excited about that run some other programs. And then landing pages, I think templatizing that makes a lot of sense. You don't necessarily need a high-priced designer anymore, and you potentially could test multiple ideas with landing pages. So I like that. So we're trying to progress to stronger evidence through helping students talk to customers. Maybe they want to go broader with a survey. It's still light evidence, but it's more than they can probably get in front of in a day. Go on to ads to landing pages, also doing some ethnographic research in a way, going through and observing, trying not to bias when you observe is probably one of the harder things. So what's the response been so far from students going through this process? Like where are they getting stuck or where are they needing help from you all?
I think one of the biggest ones that we see with our students is the interviews. After we take them through the boot camp, we've done 25 interviews with complete strangers. And we do this in downtown Calgary on a weekend. So we usually send them out to train stations and libraries, just so that they can get the experience of talking to complete strangers in places where they could actually have a conversation. And then they just assume that those 25 random interviews were enough validation to prove that they have desirability. So they go right into build mode usually after that of, I've got a landing page, now I'm ready to start to build my product. And we go, these weren't even your customers you were talking to.
For me, I think it's confirmation bias. So some of them are better at recognizing what I might call counterfactuals, data that doesn't support their opinion. And you've talked about this on occasion, David, especially last week. It's like, oh yeah, I talked to 25 people and 2 of them said I had a fantastic idea. We didn't do a testing card or some hypothesis in advance that said, if 10 out of 25 say it's a good idea, then I'm good. But getting them to do that step before they go away and do the interviews, because otherwise they just see what they want to see and come back. And sometimes when we ask them at the end, pause, pivot, or proceed. And even in our last go around, there were a couple of people who we know probably heard 20 times out of 25, this is not a good idea. But all they heard was the 5 that says it was a good idea. They're like, we're going to proceed. We're not going to make any changes. We're going ahead just the way we thought we would.
Yeah, biases are tough. I don't know if we can completely eliminate them, but we can certainly mitigate some of them. And I think having feedback from your peers or other people to help you, certainly if you do this on your own, it's easier for that to creep in. So I do think support from you both is definitely helpful there. What are some of the big success stories you're seeing come out of these early stage entrepreneurs? Because I feel as if you're investing in people more than the ideas. Like probably 9 out of the 10 ideas, I'm guessing, probably are killed in some degree. So I'm curious, like, what are some of the big success? What are some of the things you can celebrate from this testing so far?
Brandy, you want to talk about Greg first? Let's talk about Greg.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I was going to say, why don't you start with Draper University as a whole, and then I can drill down.
I think here's where the successes come from. So the first time we did anything like this, we actually had a student pitch competition. We had a student named Cole out of Edmonton who, the way he tells his story is that when he was getting ready for this pitch competition, he got his teeth kicked in twice, is the way he describes his experience. But it turns out in the room was Azra from Draper University, and she's like, you've got something here. I run a boot camp. It's $12,000 US. I think you have something so interesting. I'd be willing to give you a scholarship. And he went down. There was 100 plus startups. So not just students, but 100 plus startups from 23 countries around the world. He came back, picked as the most investable out of all of them. And when you think about two folks in Calgary and Lethbridge doing it once, you'd be like, wow, that's pretty cool. But when we do it almost 2/3 of the time, it's like, how do you do that? Well, we teach what David says. And we have another example of a student that actually comes from UFL that Brandy worked with, and he turned down the money. Go tell that story, Brandy.
Yeah, so it was fun how he started. He wanted to work on a business that was not legal yet, and he was hedging a bet on regulations changing. So it took a couple years to get him to switch over. And then he came to the kickoff weekend, did really well on his pitch, made it down to Draper University, and got offered an investment of 6 figures. So I got a phone call from him when he was down there, and he went, I just got this offer. I'm not sure what to do. So I connected him to folks like Brooke, who runs Class Rebel down here, who teaches founders about how to prepare for investments. I talked to Craig and some other folks in the network, because I think that's one of the most valuable components we can bring to these students, is helping them talk to people that have been there and done that. He decided that the investment wasn't for him. So he turned it down and came back, and still to this day, Craig and I are on the fence of, when Tim Draper offers you money, that's a hard way to say no. So I give him chops for sticking to his guns, and we'll see where he winds up. But it's one of those things where, we have our biases as well as advisors sometimes that we have to put to the side and respect what our founders are doing.
And here's the reason why I disagree with them. I don't know about Brandy, but here's the reason I disagree. We have another story of a lady who didn't win what we did, and she didn't get to go down to the full $12,000 program. She did the virtual program. And in the virtual program, Tim lets a handful of people pitch an idea. And she started with this idea here in Calgary or Edmonton. Nobody would touch it. She went down there. Her idea, Tim thought was so good, he let her pitch in the virtual program. And then she ended up, I think, in the top 3. She won a scholarship to go down again, but this time in person. She got a 6-figure investment while she was down there. She came back home. Within weeks, she raised $400,000 more. She's now raising her second $1 million. But people wouldn't touch her here. But as soon as she went down to Draper and came back with a 6-figure investment, people were like, well, hang on a second. If you have Tim Draper as an investor, here, take my money.
Yeah, I don't know how many people who have gone through the program have declined the funding. So that's always interesting to me. I've been helping out with Draper University probably since 2014 or so. And I've seen so many amazing entrepreneurs come from all around the world. It's one of the reasons I still help with that program. I just recently, even this week or last week, is a blur, I helped a bunch of entrepreneurs from Africa, Nigeria specifically, and walked them through business modeling and everything and riskiest assumptions. So that's one of the reasons I enjoy collaborating there. Just early stage people all around the world, getting to see what they're working on in their environment. It's so amazing. So when you think through, okay, so I'm just following this thread. So you're starting this program. It's starting to get some more organic reach. You have people coming down into Silicon Valley and winning funding there and coming back and socializing that. So there's kind of like that loop there. So how does one go about sort of knowing that, okay, it's time to scale this, or this is something that we want to scale? Maybe walk through some of the tests you're doing or how your thought process around, where's your risk moving in this whole program and in your approach? Because you've all been doing this for several years now.
Yeah. So, our biggest indicator was people messaging us after our boot camp. We had folks from Norway joining us when we went virtual with COVID because they found us online and went, man, this is great. I don't have resources like this. And people would reach out and say, hey, this is awesome, but you do it once a year. Where can I get help for this? So we had to put our heads together to start to noodle, figure out what more can we offer in our community where those gaps are, which led to the creation of MVP Mondays, where we take 2 entrepreneurs every second Monday over a lunch hour with a panel of experts, and we go through testing business ideas where they have to share their riskiest assumptions. We help them figure that out and give them 3 experiments that we think would work for them to run away and test. So we started to build more of a community grassroots approach, building out different events and pieces that were a little bit more accessible.
And I think also some of this comes down to the financials. So one of the things that Brandy and I have is we have this simplified financial analysis spreadsheet, which typically takes maybe 20 minutes to go through. And we've been working for the last 3 or 4 months now to build an updated version that makes it easier for people to actually go away and apply for grants. And one of my favorite stories is that spreadsheet. I got a call from a lady who I think was in Calgary. I forget where now, but she was applying for an accelerator in Singapore for health sciences. And she found this spreadsheet and she used this spreadsheet in her submission to this accelerator in Singapore. And then I got a text not that long ago that she got in. So I think once you understand that people want it, the next step is, can you find enough customers or can you make enough money at it? And when you can start making money at it, then you start saying, okay, great. Now I can start throwing some resources, talking to family and friends, applying to accelerators. And for me, the amazing thing is when you think about not just doing it with a local, even North American accelerator, but doing it with something that's health sciences and in Singapore, like just giving people those resources and watching how they get used, this has been like seeing some of these folks scale because now they know I can make enough money at it. I think, is it called the local maximus or what's it called, Brandy?
Local maxima.
Yeah, do you want to explain that just so folks who don't know what it is know what it is?
Yeah, so one of the things that we work on is entrepreneurs will focus on the most important point, the biggest problem, the biggest site that they can reach. And kind of the analogy is you want to climb the tallest mountain. So you're standing at the ground at the bottom and you find the tallest peak and you climb up that mountain and then you look over your shoulder and there's a taller mountain behind you. So when you're an entrepreneur and you're focusing on the big problem or the big idea, sometimes stepping out, finding resources, and taking a different perspective can help you find a bigger problem or a bigger opportunity that you didn't see in the first place when you first started.
Yeah.
Where pivots become very important.
Yeah, and it's just making sure the market is big enough. And as Brandy tells this story, I'm just thinking about my weekend because I went for a hike and there was a ton of snow at the top and there were 2 peaks. And I got to the first peak with my snowshoes and all my gear. And I got there and I'm like, oh my God, there's still another 1.5 kilometers and 300 meters to go. I don't have enough energy to get all the way to the top. I had to give up. I'm going to go back for a 3rd time just to get there.
But when there's no bears, right?
When there's no bears. Yeah, that trail got shut down a couple of days ago because of the grizzlies in the area now. So I have to wait till the snow melts and the grizzlies go away.
Okay, that's great stories. So I'm thinking through something you said I want to kind of double click into, which is you're talking about these sessions, so MVP Mondays, which I joined as a guest on one, and I thought it was a really interesting experience with founders there working through their real ideas. So we'll make sure the link is accessible for all you listeners. And you mentioned something about riskiest assumptions. So it's something that's been really a passionate kind of pursuit of mine over the last decade or so, which is, that's how to get people prioritized properly. And that's one of the reasons we have assumptions mapping and all that. What happens, this is always interesting to me, what happens when people are showing you how they're thinking about risk and it's, oh wait, you know what? There's no risk whatsoever. It's all, we have everything figured out. Or all my risk is building, already validated. That's my favorite when I talk to customers and validated that, or I interviewed a couple of people, validated that, or I ran some surveys and validated that. So how are you providing feedback to people or helping them understand that there are other risks than just building, or there might be some things that they're not considering? Like, tell me how that process goes.
So I tend to use Socratic questioning for my approach. Craig and I have 2 very different approaches. We're like good cop, bad cop. So we work really well together. I always come out of like, how do you know, right? So kind of digging a little bit more into that validation. I'm sure you've seen this too, David, of people, well, I just know. I've worked in this space for 20 years and I just know. And we go, that's not enough to convince me to trust you. And then, the question goes, well, how many people have given you money for this idea so far? And then they tell me 0. So I kind of try to lead them down the path of discovery for themselves, of finding out, oh, maybe I don't have it nailed down. A lot of the times people go, well, my marketing campaign's just not working. And so we have to try to get them through questioning to go down this road of maybe I don't have an understanding of the actual problem I'm solving. So I take the good cop approach of questioning to try to lead them to water. And sometimes when that doesn't work, Craig comes in with his bad cop piece.
And it's not that, I don't say might is right. There's a saying in here somewhere, and I learned this from Guy Kawasaki when I first had a chance to meet him when I was in Silicon Valley for my first startup. He says, eat like a bird and poop like an elephant. And what I say to people is, okay, this is in my head and does you no good if it's in my head, but I think you're wrong. And here's why I think you're wrong. And here's what I think you need to go away and do next. And I'm not saying you are wrong. I'm just saying, I think you're wrong. Now, sometimes entrepreneurs are They're still convinced they have desirability figured out. And that's like Brandy talks about. We then go, okay, great. If you think desirability is solved, let's go talk about viability. Like, how much money have you made selling this? And all of a sudden, it's crickets. And that's when we help them, I think, understand if people aren't paying for it, you need to go back. And sometimes we describe this as slingshotting. You need to go backwards to then go forwards faster. And I think Brandy's really good at trying to guide them there and let them get there on their own. And I don't know if I'm as patient as Brandy is. And I just go, you're so wrong, you don't even know it. And we try to say, okay, I'm not saying you're wrong. I just think you're wrong. And I'm not telling you what to do. I'm just telling you what I would do if I was you. And sometimes people are good with that, and sometimes they're not so good. But that's okay. I think being honest and candid and giving them that guidance from the two of us and others on that panel, the sooner they hear that they need to go backwards, the less likely they are to waste time. And sometimes it's years and a ton of money pursuing something that we know doesn't go anywhere. And I think we care enough to tell people our version of the truth. And unfortunately, there's not, I'm saying not everybody, but there's not a lot, but I think that's hard to come by, right? It's rare.
We always like to ask the question of, do you want to be right or do you want to be successful? So we can run some experiments to prove you're right, and it's not going to help you build a business, or we can find out where you're wrong so that you can grow a successful business. And I think that framework sometimes can be helpful to pull an entrepreneur out of their idea because it's your baby. It's something you live and breathe all the time. It's hard to look at that and go, oh, I could be wrong. And I've invested X amount of time and dollars into this. I have to keep going.
I think one of the things Brandy's helped me get better at is I ask, how honest of feedback do you want me to give? So before I give completely honest feedback, I go, okay, on a scale of 1 to 10 or 1 to 12, like, how honest do you want me to be with the feedback? And right, I think that helps, because when they say, oh, I'm okay, like, throw it all out there, then I think they're much more open to hearing stuff they don't want.
Yeah, we should do like a spice-o-meter on our feedback for to see how spicy our feedback can be.
Yeah, I'm in the situation where I have to give feedback, and I try to use, different thinking hats, like the bonus thinking hats. I'll do like, oh, this was what confusing to me. So I'll ask like clarifying questions, or I'll say, oh, this is something you could try, that I see is missing. Or then obviously I have to give some feedback. It's like, this is what looks wrong, like you're explaining all these different revenue streams that don't have a source. Like, where are these revenue streams coming from? Like, this seems like this is wrong. And so that does help me a bit, like, kind of capture it. And I do explain it before I give feedback that way. I'm like, look, this is how I'm going to give feedback. Some of it's going to be clarifying. Some of it's going to be stuff to try. Some of it's going to be stuff that's wrong. Take what you need. Something you mentioned I thought was really fascinating. It always comes up as a symptom of, oh, my ads aren't working, or no one's signing up on my landing page, and those are kind of these symptoms of, oh, we probably have the wrong value proposition, or if we even have the right value proposition, we're targeting the wrong customer. And so I think jumping to those activities really quickly, sometimes you do have to kind of go back again, because it's like, oh, I don't know why no one's using this or why they're not signing up. And you have to start doing that kind of reverse engineering. And I'm trying to help prevent that waste of just, hey, let's spend a little bit more time earlier, so we have maybe words of the customer we can put in the landing page, or words in the customer we can put in the ad, and we know what kind of demographic we target. So I do think sometimes when they're coming to you and they're explaining, oh, this just isn't working, or et cetera, it's kind of a deeper problem that you need to kind of uncover with a lack of understanding of the problem and the customer.
Absolutely. I just had a beer with my friend Jessica, who was mentoring a Calgary startup, and she had some Google ads. And she talked to her and she said, these aren't performing. I'm not doing well. And Jess has been in marketing for 8 years. And she told me they were some of the best conversion rates she has ever seen for ads in the digital space. So sometimes there's also this factor of an entrepreneur just not knowing and having a higher level of assumption. And I think you talk about this, David, when you're starting, about those measurements, right? Of if I'm 80% successful, well, is that a standard? Is that actually achievable? And so there's kind of this also question at that early stage that really adds in that sticky spot for entrepreneurs of, I don't even know if I'm going to be right, because I don't know what a successful ad looks like. And this entrepreneur's problem was that they had it in front of the wrong landing page. So they were sending people to their website, but not to their product page. So people were getting lost on the website. And it wasn't that their ads were bad. It was just that the navigation wasn't quite where it needed to be. So there can be many factors that go into it. And it's often just getting a second set of eyes of people that have been there before to help you figure out where it is that you could tweak.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. It's so much of just having somebody give you feedback and say, oh, I think this is actually not so doomed. You just need to tweak this thing. So it's like, I often say I'm trying to stop people from getting too excited or too depressed in the process, because there's definitely highs and lows. So we've talked about sort of the early days, how you started testing this entrepreneurship program, how you've sort of grown that organically over time, and how the demand has been more like a pull than a push, so people reaching out to you. So where is this all headed? Like, what are y'all working on next or over the next 6 to 12 months?
Yeah, so I mean, a couple of things that we haven't touched on yet was part of what we also included. We started doing some testing around how do we take what we were doing and how do we find a way to do it on a more regular basis, but also leverage the voice of other people. So we created something called Founder Fridays. And we started because the feedback we got was, this is great, but you just do it in the summer. You've got this kickoff weekend and you've got this innovation rodeo. The MVP Mondays are okay, but I'm either not there or I'm past this. So we started doing something called Founder Fridays. And we started by trying to interview Brad Feld, the founder of Techstars. And he said, oh, I'm too busy, I can't make it. And he gave us Ian Hathaway. And they wrote a book called The Startup Community Way. So we said, let's run an experiment. Let's just do an interview with Ian and see how people sign up for this idea of how do we do something on Fridays. And we had, in the province alone, 685 people signed up. We had 100 copies of his book. They were gone in 106 seconds. So we then started about 6 months later this process called Founder Fridays. And every month we pick a different author and we read the book and interview them. And we actually mentioned, so the reason that I know the pages in your book so well, David, is that's part of what we do, is we go, hey, don't read the whole book, start on page 38 where you can do this. We've now done, I think, 33. We're now getting ready for the next series. And one of the things that we have found entrepreneurs struggle, and the reason they're not interviewing total strangers is they can't find people to interview. So we've started something called Help a Startup Out. Brandy, do you want to tell me about Help a Startup Out?
Yeah, so Help a Startup Out was mostly an initiative that we started looking at to try to connect entrepreneurs with the right type of people to interview. So they'd start with their friends and family, and then they'd get stuck. Or they'd go to the train station, and then they'd get stuck. So we have this giant community from Founder Fridays and MVP Mondays of mentors and advisors and other startups that want to help startups. They're signed up to mentorship pages and things, and they want to get engaged. And our early stage startups don't know how to ask for help. So our kind of initial idea with Help a Startup Out was to start an email page where startups that had figured out their specific types of customers they wanted to interview could get a hold of us, and we'd send it out to our list, and people that fit that demographic or new people could answer the call and join an interview.
And to test this, we're actually going through a Techstars startup weekend in a couple of weeks to actually run our own hypothesis through this whole process, right? Because sometimes even Brandy and I, might have a little bit of confirmation bias. How do we find a way to put total strangers on our team, and how do we go run this idea through this whole process? And as we think about this, originally we were like, we don't know if it's going to work. And then I think for me, two things happened. One, when we interviewed Tony Ulrich on the Jobs to Be Done framework, and we learned about not just the functional needs that people have, but also the social and emotional needs. And we're like, oh, hang on a second. In the social and emotional, there's something here. And right now, we're getting ready to interview, Brandy is tomorrow, Jono Bacon, and he's talking about the same thing. What are the reasons people join a community? And it's not just functional. So how do we find a way to understand that a whole lot better?
We got stuck in a feasibility trap ourselves. We kind of modeled this after Peter Shankman's Harrow, Help a Reporter Out. So we called him up and we asked him. We did an interview with him. We talked to a couple expert stakeholders to get started. And the number one thing we kept hearing is like, unless there's a pull for the side of people that want to help do the interviews, this is never going to go anywhere. So then we went, okay, well, how do we build something that's going to work? And how do we do all this focus? And we kind of ran into this very interesting problem where we ran around for, I don't know, a few months trying to figure out what to do with this idea rather than focusing on our customers, which was very interesting. So even the experts, as it were, we fall into these traps of trying to think about that. And when Craig and I were talking about it, I went, hold on a second. What are some alternatives? Like Kickstarter exists. There's crowdfunding, right? There's all these kinds of spaces. GoFundMe. People just give people money to help with initiatives. So some of these potential biases and assumptions we have in our mind can kind of prohibit us from moving ahead, which is very interesting. So it's something that's hard to avoid, even when you do this every day.
Yeah, and when I think about this, I think about a saying a while ago when someone said I would never do a marathon on 10 days notice. And I'm like, tell me I can't and I'll show you I can. I ended up beating my brother by 25 minutes. And Brandy talks sometimes when we do things in spite just to prove people wrong. And sometimes that can be a good motivation, but you need to go away and gather the data. And that's what I'm looking forward to doing before the end of June when we go through this Techstars weekend.
Yeah, definitely. I remember going to an early book launch with Eric Ries, and he was talking about post-lean startup, how the one concept people hadn't really bought into was this idea of a long-term stock exchange or something as a longer-term view without sacrificing short-term. And I don't want to say he did it out of spite, but that's certainly one of the drivers of why he went off and helped build that after the lean startup. I was thinking that when you were talking about this, it sounded as if you are doing almost like a concierge experiment where you're going to manually connect people who need to find people to interview. You're just going to go through your list and kind of go into that detail a bit more because it feels very manual, or maybe I misunderstood.
Yeah. So, there is that side. If we have some folks that maybe put their request out through the email that don't work, we're working with Adam Burke on this, and we are well connected, right? So in our network, we have a lot of folks, and we kind of have been testing this over the last few years on our LinkedIn when we get entrepreneurs that come and ask us for help. I had a student of a business advisor in town that's taking her bachelor's in product development, and she wanted to interview some Canadian startups for an undergrad thesis, but she didn't have any contacts. So I put a LinkedIn post out to try to find the right folks for her to connect. So that's something we've kind of been noodling on, I guess, in that sense. And I'll maybe let Craig talk a little bit about the form and the structure of what we actually are hoping Hasso can function as on that piece.
Yeah, so I think, David, the way I try to explain it is that it's a two-sided exchange. So on one side, let's say we've got 10,000 people, just general public who have done stuff on Kickstarter, GoFundMe, have either attended a session and said, a checkbox, I'm willing to help a startup out. When we give away the books, that's one of the things we have a checkbox. Would you be willing to help a startup out? So we have this list of people who would receive an email. So let's pretend you're on the list, David. Okay, so you're one of 10,000 people. Brandy comes one day and says, hey, I solved this problem. These are 3 things I want to know, or 3 things about my target customer, ideal client profile, ICP. We use bifurcation to figure those things out. So I would then take Brandy's email and say, hey, Brandy's looking for someone who has this problem that happens to be a single mom with 1 kid and is under the age of 35. And then you might just be on that list that meet that criteria. You're like, I want to help the startup out. So I'm not filtering this to anybody. Everybody gets it. And then what happens is if you're one of the people that would like to help out, there's a form you would go to, the entrepreneur is set up where they collect your contact information, and now they can phone you and do the interview. So it's right now completely unfiltered, unmanaged. But one of the things that Adam is trying to get us towards, and I'm not against, but I want to test first, is do we want to have people tell us a few things about themselves so we don't have to wait for someone to email back to be able to close that loop? So I don't think we're there yet, but at some point, based upon our experiments, that's something we might encourage people to include if on a voluntary basis and be able to gather some data and see who does it and how well it actually makes a difference.
Yeah, I think that's definitely, it'd be interesting to see how the tests go and the traction and whether or not people are having fruitful conversations. I think to some extent, if you look at bigger picture, you do have people that pay for these kind of services, but they're usually bigger companies. And at that point, they're often doing like usability testing and things like that. So when I've ever had to use those platforms to help people, I always kind of felt like I had to hack them a little bit. But I think that's something definitely worth exploring. So it seems as if your journey was, okay, let's get people to at least value testing, not just build and go off and try to sell it. And now that you've made so much progress there, you're at a point where you now have people who are like, oh yeah, I want to do this, but I just can't find the customers I need to talk to. And so now it feels like you're moving a little forward and now you're trying to solve that problem.
Absolutely. We're going to see how that functions. It's always one of those fun things where, as soon as you solve a problem, another one is born. So I think what's cool about this process is we don't necessarily have a solution in mind of, an AI bot or a platform that would be an all-in-one stop shop for entrepreneurs. We're really just iterating our way forward based on what our community is asking for, which is really rooted in that desirability side.
And I think, Brandy, if you and I had done this when we first met 7 years ago, we wouldn't be doing this the way we are today.
No.
Yeah, we certainly learn from experience over time as well. But it's amazing. I love how you're really being thoughtful about this. You're trying to help entrepreneurs understand this process, but you're also testing your way through it, which, as we all know, is really hard, even if we are experts in it. Sometimes that works against us. So I really thank you for sharing your story. Brandy, if people want to learn more about you and what you're up to, where should they go?
Yeah, great question. They can find me on LinkedIn. My name is Brandy Old, and they can also find me on the Alberta Innovates website. I'm a TDA, so I do business advising for Alberta-based businesses and help them get access to our non-dilutive grants and connect into our community and miss those confirmation biases so that they can scale faster.
Thank you. And Craig, where would people go to learn more about you and what you're up to?
Same thing, LinkedIn. I want to give Brandy some credit. So Brandy got on LinkedIn when she was like 17 years old. I'm like, I don't think I got on LinkedIn on day 8, but I think when I got on LinkedIn, I think I was like 36 or something like this. So yeah. And then here's the other thing I think we both do really well, which I think is good for other people to think about, is that Brandy owns a domain name called brandyold.com. I own CraigElias.com. So worst comes to worst, just type our name in and put a .com at the end and watch what happens.
I have to raise my hand there too. I also have davidjbland.com. I always put the J in because it makes it sound like more interesting. But I really want to thank you so much for hanging out and sharing really openly with how you're trying to empower early stage entrepreneurs and empower student entrepreneurship, but also being very thoughtful in how you're testing your way through it. I know I'm a fan, so I'm sure people who have listened to this will also become fans and hopefully reach out to you. So I just want to thank you both for your time and keep helping people test their ideas.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks, David.
David, a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to another episode of How I Tested That, where we share stories about experimentation, tips, and tricks. If you learned something new, please recommend us to a friend or colleague. And remember, keep testing your ideas.